Welcome to the Nerds and Friends podcast. My name is Josh Lindquist. Today we're joined by Marley Williford. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast. And we just
Thank you,
realized we
Josh.
have matching nails today, so that's very exciting.
We do.
Yes, it's awesome. So, real quick before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Isra Sravenhart and Wayne Termel, two author friends of the podcast, for supporting us. Just want to give a shout out to them. Search their stuff, and they have a lot of great books on Amazon for everyone listening. So check them out and check out our interviews with them in previous episodes because they are awesome. So today we're very happy to have Marley joining us because you are an expert on feminism and pop culture and nerd culture, which is all the things we love here at the podcast. So really excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
There is a lot to talk about.
There is a lot to talk about because just to be super, super vague and generalizing, it seems like we've made some progress in the last decade or so, but there's still so much more to make is kind of my assessment. So that's a good jump in way to what are your thoughts on that?
Well, in some ways, yeah, like there has been a significant amount of progress in, say, last 10 years, even 10, 20 years. But then we've also seen a pretty significant backlash. And I think the backlash against Me Too right now, especially, is really, really strong. And the way that ties in with nerd culture is, you can tie the feminist movement back through, and the rise of the alt-right back through Gamergate in 2014. Right. So these are really significant, like pieces of the population, I guess, in terms of determining where the culture war is going to go. So yes and no, like progress, yes, but then also backlash. The progress sets us back a few steps, and it's an uneven path forward. That's just the nature of justice and the nature of civil rights. It seems.
I wish it was less messy and more linear, but it's not.
We all do. I mean, most of us do. Actually,
the cool
we all
folks
do.
Among us do. Yeah.
It's just the direction that you wish was more linear is really what determines if you're left wing or right wing. Yeah. Like if you're like, I wish it was linear in the backwards direction, then yeah, you might be a conservative.
Yeah, certainly going on the internet can be really disheartening sometimes, because some of the things I follow, I guess, especially lately, I've been watching the new Kenobi series of Star Wars, and I love it. I think it's great. But seeing some people's reactions to the female characters in the show has been really disheartening. And it's like, I don't understand it. And it's really, it's troubling to see that taking a foothold on the internet,
Yeah, but I think about, what the internet was like for me growing up. So we both grew up on the internet, yep, more or less. And to me, the internet has always been kind of a semi-hostile space, like playing in, say, like Halo public matches was, kind of hell for like an 11-year-old Marley, getting really like visceral sexual harassment for the first time in my life.
Awful.
I mean, and then there's just this kind of general attitude of like, oh, there are no girls on the internet. Tits or get the fuck out, sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to curse on your podcast.
Oh, you do. We curse all the time. You're good.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so those types of things. This is a culture that has existed and has always had a foothold. And I think what more is likely happening is that more people are seeing inside of those circles because they rub up against the broader public discussions, big fandoms that affect huge swaths of the population. And then of course, this like explosion of fandom related blockbusters. We've got, the Marvel movies and everything, making these cultures bigger than they have been ever. And so I think it's more that, I guess I would say, ordinary people who wouldn't ordinarily fall into misogynistic hate movements kind of get swept up in it because it's just a part of the general pop culture and it's part of what everybody's talking about.
That totally makes sense.
And also because a lot of people have internalized sexism that they don't really reckon with until it becomes this very public thing. So Yeah, there's kind of always been an undercurrent of that.
Yeah. What are some ways like that we can combat that and continue to push things forward? I know there's always going to be, like you said really well, backlash to progress, and that it's kind of like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We kind of go that way. And real quick though, we're going to jump in. My co-host Will, it looks like he actually was able to make it, so I'll introduce you guys and we'll bring him into the conversation.
Great.
So that'll be cool. I'm glad Will can make it. I was hoping he would. Hi, Will. We'll see him in a moment, I assume. For now, he's just, hey, Will, how's it going, buddy?
Hey.
Hi there.
Will, this is Marley. Marley, this is Will.
It's nice to meet you.
Yes, hello, friend.
Will, before we get started, me and Marley have matching nails. What's your nails game going today? You got anything special for us?
Terrible.
But we're all painted, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, mine are starting. It's my first time getting my nails done, and I didn't get gels, so they're already starting to look all messy. And I'm like, I need to do it again. So
Nathan Childs is joining.
Nathan's joining. Hey, Nathan.
Nathan.
Yes, it is I.
Small world, friends. Look
Very
at this.
tiny world.
How's
I
it going,
apologize
guys?
for being late. I just got home.
Dude, you're fine. No worries. Well, to get you guys caught up, me and Marley started a conversation about the internet and kind of modern day misogyny and feminism and where we're at and a lot of the obstacles that we're facing. So we kind of just started with the tip of the iceberg on this. And so I'm sure we have lots to talk about, but I know for me, as a man, I'm like, what can I do to combat this? Because first off, there's of course making sure that I'm not a part of it, and then second, how can I help other people who are a part of it to curb this kind of stuff? So I wanted to ask an expert, which is Marley. So there we go.
Oh, understandable. I mean, this podcast being hosted primarily by all men, clearly we understand everything there is to know.
Well, I would say that something that does need to happen to combat this issue is going to be more on the systemic level. Internet is operated on algorithms. A lot of the hate that swirls around and gets into the far reaches of the internet happens because we have these algorithms set up so that content that inspires a strong emotional reaction, whether that emotional reaction is good or bad, gets promoted more quickly. So that's a systemic issue, right? That's where we need to have, ethics and people who work in the humanities also involved in technology and involved in the process of creating these algorithms and saying, okay, we need to be cognizant of how that's going to play out in the real world once people do start posting hateful content, because it's always going to happen. But as far as like from an individual's perspective, I can tell you what I've been trying to do to make my social media a better space, and to make sure that I'm interacting with it in a responsible way. So for example, if you do see hateful content, it is super helpful to actually report that content. I know that most of these websites do have very serious issues with moderation and are probably not necessarily going to take a post down just because you reported it is hateful. But it's worth doing anyway, just to get those numbers showing, seeing that people care about it. And the other thing that you can do is to combat it when you're seeing it in your friends, because this will happen in your close personal circles, and it means having awkward conversations. It means when somebody's talking a lot about how Brie Larson is a whore or whatever on his Facebook for seemingly no reason, it's about you, the men, getting in touch with that guy and saying, what's all of this obsession about this female actress or this female public figure? And have you really thought about, like
the damage that your
critically
comments
thought
can
about?
perpetuate, yeah.
Exactly, and critically thought about what the actual causes of why you're so emotional about this thing.
Right.
So those are some little things that you can do. And if you're seeing say you're following an account or a page or something that's often putting out kind of hateful, weirdly tinged articles, you can unfollow those pages, and that'll help clean up your dashboard, whatever.
Yeah.
Your news
your
page. I don't know
Facebook or Twitter or
Yeah.
Instagram feeds.
And it gives them less
Thank you.
visibility, right? It gives them less visibility, the less followers they have and the less interaction they're getting with their negative content.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And it's less likely that you're going to have that quick, fiery, emotional reaction that makes you quote retweet or share or whatever, which is really what the benefit is. They're hoping that you don't even notice where it's coming from before you've already shared it to other people. So, yeah, evaluating sources, that's really good. But I feel like there's so much more to talk about on this topic. So I kind of wanted to hear what you guys were hoping to discuss.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting like catch-22 there when you are talking about just like regulating your feed, because you do at a certain point you risk putting yourself into an echo chamber, but you also kind of risk isolating those ideas so that they create their own echo chamber where those ideas aren't getting challenged.
Yeah, and I think the idea is that certain ideologies, fascism, or these kind of really hateful, regressive political movements do kind of need to be isolated into, you kind of have to choke them out so that they're not getting that kind of widespread attention, and more importantly, kind of centrist loudspeakering of it, you know what I mean? Like where you've got now it's just every run of the day conservatives that are saying things that fascists say, because it's because it's circulated from that part of the internet into just general conservative spaces. But as far as putting yourself into your own echo chamber, I think that's a really good point. And that's something that we've got to be really cautious of, because it is the tendency to like see something that you don't necessarily agree with and just unfollow from that page. And like, I don't need to hear that voice anymore. So something that you can do that academics recommend, and probably your English teacher in high school recommended, is to use methods of evaluating sources. So checking if they cite where they get their information from, how often are they printing retractions on articles, how often do they have to add end notes to the articles, and getting some sources together that you find to be generally trustworthy and less biased. I'm not going to say unbiased, because there are no unbiased sources. And also to have a diversity, so that if one paper has a bias in one direction, you can go somewhere else. Wall Street Journal is always going to promote Wall Street, and that's just the nature of it. That doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out, which is another tendency. Yeah.
That's a really good point, because I'm glad we're talking about how to do this the fine way, because there's so many implications to how you're curating your own feed for yourself personally, but then how that's impacting those other sources' presence online. So it's like what we're consuming on social media has more of an impact than just what we're getting, which I think is a really important thing for people to realize, because you don't think about it that often. At least I don't, and so it's good to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm curious, kind of to circle back that we were talking about with the technology space. Like, I had a TikTok once that went up, and I got a super hateful comment on it. And I reported. Well, first I commented back and said, "That's fucking racist and terrible. Why would you say that?" And then I reported the comment, and they said they'll notify me if it gets taken down. And there was never any follow up on that. So that was disheartening.
The moderation is so bad, and part of it is because companies just don't feel like they need to invest in moderation, because it's really at cross purposes with their business model. So take Facebook, for example. If Facebook invests a whole bunch of money in hiring human moderators to look at everything that gets complained about, you're going to have a lot of people spending a lot of time, which means a lot of money for Facebook.
Yeah.
And what they're taking down is also the thing that Facebook makes most of its money on. They would be taking down content, they'd be taking down posts, and more often they'd be taking down really good, engaging content that people are really excited about, whether they're excited about it because it's super cute, or because it's super controversial, or violent, or hateful, or whatever. Doesn't really matter to Facebook's bottom line.
Right.
The money comes to the the money comes either way. So trying to encourage these big, tech giants to invest in better moderation and make it so that when you do report a comment, you actually do get follow-up from a person about who looked at the comment and determined whether or not it, met their policies. There's just no real financial reason for them to do that. So they're never going to do it without regulation.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Well, honestly, right now, it's been found a couple different times from different sources that it's counterproductive for these large corporations to do that, because they live on these controversies. Like if you have somebody posts something that has a controversial statement, i.e., and I'm trying to think of something that's so obtuse, that seems so extreme, it's clearly a joke, but I actually can't think of anything that's that far off.
It's not a good sign.
Yeah. But let's say they say X is really controversial.
Let's say Josh Lindquist is really controversial and it's generating a lot of views.
So much controversy.
Yeah.
And then you have a lot of interactions with that post, be it good or bad,
or proponent.
Yeah. Like let's say somebody posts something of that Ghostbusters in, what was it, 2017 or whatever, is bad because they cast women. Yeah. That's going to be a controversial post. And you have people that you're going to have the misogynists out there like, yeah, this person gets it, repost. And then you're going to have a bunch of people posting against it
are going to be like, well, I'm invested in being a feminist, and therefore I need to talk. Yeah.
So then, exactly, and you have the feminists there saying that's an incredibly sexist take. And then you have a third party of, I agree this movie was bad, but it had nothing to do with casting women. And then you have that the like three people who really love that movie, who are just going after anybody aggressively who doesn't like it, and just start calling everybody sexist.
And by
the only person who wins there. Oh, go ahead, Marley. Sorry.
By this time, the controversy has spread to almost every corner of the internet, and people are getting it from all sides, that the people who did not care one way or the other about 2016 Ghostbusters are now also posting about how they don't care about 2016 Ghostbusters. So you've got every demographic of people involved and posting and generating things for Facebook to make money off of, and they make money off of it either way. So the only real winner is Facebook. Yeah,
Facebook wins, and the loser is humanity. The other people who actually really profit off of that type of attention was 2016 Ghostbusters, because that's a ton of free advertising for them. And I forget which production studio makes that, but I would be absolutely shocked if they weren't feeding into that controversy intentionally, trying to push that and make this a divisive topic, just because that's going to save them millions of dollars on advertising.
So that actually makes me think of something really interesting that I've noticed on Twitter lately, which are bot accounts that are specifically created to stan like one movie or one actress and retweet every single thing that somebody tweets about that movie or actress, and only creates and they're like AI, bot accounts generating tweets about these things that are coming out. and going and commenting on other people's tweets about this same thing. So it's got to be a marketing thing, right? Yeah. I can't think of another reason why somebody would deploy a bot that does that.
And just as a counterpoint, let's say there's a very high profile court case about
gee, what are you talking about, Will?
Yeah,
what high profile court case? There's some hypothetical
about
court
let's say a famous actor and a famous actress who nobody on Twitter is actually gaining anything from this, but for some reason there's a bunch of bots are created for seemingly no reason except for
I just gotta say, with that hypothetical court case that we're not talking about, I saw so many people with so many ugly hot takes, and I'm like, they acting like they know these people or they have personal stakes in the case. Like, it was just it just really some people I really lost respect for, seeing their social media, the way they were responding to this case. That has nothing to do with them, and it was really disheartening.
Yeah, I haven't seen a social media craze. I'm gonna go ahead and call it a misogynistic hate campaign like that literally since Gamergate. It got to everybody's feeds, and I deliberately didn't interact with anything related to that case. I did not like any tweets. I did not retweet anything. I didn't share any posts. I didn't click on any news articles about it, like nothing, for 3 weeks. And I still ended up seeing a flood of it on my feed, which either means it's getting promoted to me because somebody wants it to be promoted to me, or it was just so widespread that it was inescapable at some point. And I when I talked to other people about what their social medias looked like during the trial, it's basically the same thing. They're like, even if I tried to avoid it, I couldn't, because it was just everywhere. So and like, it got really ugly and weird on TikTok, especially. I think you guys may have heard something about that, about the like, I'm gonna do a TikTok dance to someone's testimony about being assaulted. Or
I missed that, but I'm not on TikTok that often. But that's tasteless at the least,
Yeah.
Well, and it was just a lot of truly tasteless content being generated, and at just an amazing speed, because it was the thing that everybody was talking about for 3 weeks. So it becomes kind of irreverent at some point. I don't think I necessarily would like characterize everybody who did something like that or had a nasty take about it as being like a bad person or being, like a sadist. I think it just kind of, you get desensitized and you get swept up in the culture war and the discourse about it, and it's like fun to take a side, and it's almost like football teams, right? And I think people kind of get caught up in the pageantry of social media and forget about the real human thing that was happening at the center of it a lot of the time.
Well, it became like a sporting event, like you said, and it got sensationalized in a really ugly way that I just was disappointed in.
I think you really just kind of hit the nail on the head from my perspective. It always seems to be of just I'm gonna just pick a side, and that's gonna be my identity here with this, regardless if I'm right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just about my team winning at this point.
Right. And unfortunately, we see that in politics now. Sorry, I keep cutting you off. Sorry.
No, you're good. I mean, that's also beneficial to social media companies and any company that's operating on big data, because the more that we put ourselves into little identity categories and little boxes, the easier we are to market to. And you wouldn't believe the kind of like feminist kitsch and God only knows what else, that I get ads for on social media sites. It's always like, well, we know that you're a feminist, Marley. Don't you want a little pin for your jacket that says feminist? And don't you want to buy a little Black Lives Matter hoodie? Don't you care about Black lives? And it's like, I do, but I don't need to. I'm wearing a shirt that's like, this is a feminist interpretation of a statue, sold by like a little kitschy feminist shop online. So you're not exempt from it. That's the one thing, or at least I'm not exempt from it. I definitely have bought a bunch of that stuff, but I am being marketed to on the basis of me continuing to think of feminist as a core part of my identity and perform that online. And it's not just feminists too. They also send me a lot of weight loss ads. There's a reason for that, so Facebook knows a lot about my kind of inner psychology and the things that I think about myself and the things that I care about, than I even consciously do a lot of the time. And I think that's probably a lot of people, because these algorithms are very, very good at putting people into boxes and encouraging people to put themselves into boxes, put themselves into marketing categories that can get smaller and smaller and more precise.
Right.
And they have no taste when it comes to it. For me, I've talked about this on the podcast a little bit. I'm in recovery for alcohol addiction. And when I look up resources to get help for that, I get more and more alcohol ads on my social media. And I'm like, gee, thanks, Facebook. I appreciate it. Like, it's insidious at times,
So insidious. Absolutely insidious.
That's one of the reasons I'm getting a little burnt out on the whole capitalism thing and wouldn't mind some changes.
Oh, we can talk about that.
Conservative Josh, no longer conservative Josh. Yeah.
Bring me on the podcast to talk about capitalism. That's my other favorite topic.
Awesome. We'll do that. Our other co-host, Carrie, he's super into that too, so we'll bring him on for that. That'll be fun.
Yeah, we'll have to do another one and just have
yes.
Yeah.
Part 2. Yes. Capitalism. Part of the problem.
Why is it not great? Maybe. Possibly.
But,
that's the level of discourse you have to engage with in anti-capitalism in America. You have to be like, okay, but maybe, just maybe, it's not the greatest thing ever. And people are like,
whoa,
Dave, pump the brakes.
Pump the brakes, socialists. Whoa, hey. I'm just saying maybe it's not perfect. Maybe we can make some improvements.
Yeah.
But I think we would be kind of remiss here, and I don't want to detract from misogyny, which honestly I've been on the internet since like early 90s, probably before I have memories of being on the internet. And I have to I do have to wonder, like, the opposite effect there is going to be the misandry, and like, how do you respond to like getting those like misandrous ideas just constantly thrown at you, which
this is a dumb Josh moment. What's misandry? Sorry.
The opposite of misogyny.
Okay.
Like,
so like if women were being sexist against men.
Yeah, like the stereotypical feminist, where instead of having actual feminist ideas, they're sitting there as like, oh, I hate all men for all reasons and they should be enslaved. And like,
I've never encountered this in reality on the internet.
Sorry to interrupt, Will. I've kind of encountered this in Reddit, because I follow certain subreddits, one being called Men's Rights, and it's like,
oh
yeah, I don't really follow it to see why all women are bad. It's very, I've noticed it's very misandrous, if that's the right term, and it's honestly it's not something that I'm super interested in like I thought I was when I had a former coworker suggest it, and I'm like, I followed it for just to, out of curiosity's sake. And
I had a cat forcing his way in the door, so I let him in because my cats rule my house. So continue.
You gotta love cats.
Gotta love them.
But
else.
Yeah. It just, I'm trying to see it from both perspectives, both feminist and really like the term meninist, or I don't know what the term would be. People that are just Go ahead.
There's like the men's rights activists, which are kind of a distinct group that exists as part of something called the manosphere, which is a collection of different, we'll say, male-centered ideologies on the internet, including men's rights activists, or the red pill, including, have you not heard of that?
No, I've not.
Okay. I don't know if I need to go that deep into a dive today, but the manosphere, the manosphere consists of men's rights activists, incels, and MGTOW, and pickup artists. MGTOW is men going their own way, who are men who choose not to have sex with women as an assertion of like male power. Is like, yeah, I'm seeing so many dazed looks. It's a thing.
Yeah.
It's a
No,
thing.
I'm very familiar with all of the subgroups, the subcategories of Jason Peterson followers.
Jordan
Peterson.
Yeah.
Right.
So there is that. As far as misandrists, like man-hating women, it's definitely a thing. I mean, there are definitely women that hate men. There may even be enough to call them a group of misandrists. But there's not really a community for misandry online. There are kind of individual women who will, be like, I hate men, throw men in prison. Like, even in a joking tone, I've made jokes like that before. Oh, hi, kitty. Here, break up the seriousness with a little bit of cat. No, anyway.
I think that's an important thing you're saying, of people making, offhand jokes and actual movements, though. And because I feel like that's a good distinction there.
Yeah, there doesn't really seem to be a big movement for it. I don't know that you could find like a really robust misandry community on Reddit or Facebook that I'm aware of. And keep in mind, this is like most of what my attention goes to. So it's certainly a problem. You don't want to have your feminist movement derailed by like just envious, pissy hating on men. That doesn't really get us anywhere. But certainly I don't think it's like we have like a misogyny problem and a misandry problem. Like, I wouldn't put them on the same level.
No. Well, I think kind of the issue that we have with misandry is this like caricature stereotype, where instead of like, when you have this misandrist as a stand-in for feminism, whenever you need a shorthand for this character as being a feminist. Like, let's say you have a cartoon show and you're trying to show these protesters on a college campus, and instead of being like equal rights for women or equal pay, it's execute all men on their sign or something like that.
Yeah, it's more of a representation issue, and it's because we have kind of a misogynistic culture that hates feminism and hates women. I mean, that's just that is just kind of a fact of American life right now in 2022. I think that's evident. When feminism gets represented on screen, you're representing what could potentially be a very challenging idea, a very challenging ideology to the culture that it's being represented by. So oftentimes when that's happening in media, you'll get kind of these like over the top man-hating feminists in TV shows, and or they'll have the feminist character who just doesn't actually seem that engaged in the actual like thought of feminism, but is more just repeating hashtags and stuff that you've heard on social media. So it kind of comes across like the writers don't know what feminism is outside of just seeing it on social media via hashtags. So I think that's part of what contributes to what you're talking about there.
Yeah, where you have these kind of like you have these outliers that are predominantly a joke for actual feminists, kind of, that become the face of this actual movement. And weirdly, I find that very comparable to like socialism. Not to get back into the political sphere.
I know,
but,
I derailed.
Oh, this is all political. This is all political.
Yeah, but yeah, honestly, it is. So I don't feel that bad anymore. Never mind.
Please.
But yeah, it's in that same thing where you have like a democratic socialist, like let's say Bernie Sanders, who, if you look historically, his politics are very central. They're just a little left of center, and he's made to be this like far left, like I can't think of actually a far left figure that to compare him to. Like,
they're like, it's like
Hitler,
if we elected Fidel Castro, like this is
Or
this
Che
is
Guevara.
Bernie Sanders. Yeah, Che Guevara.
Yeah, and like even them, they're left, but they're not nearly like, if you look into the actual politics of even like the farthest left political figures that have been allowed to maintain any power for any extended period of time, they're not that far left compared to even the standards right now, where the Overton window has been shifted so far right that liberal, which historically has been a term for a pretty centrist group of people, is now considered the far left of American politics. And we have some literal Nazis, which I probably shouldn't say because we're going to get like censored on YouTube for that, but like actual people who are so far beyond the pale of their fascism that in just like the mainstream politics. And it's kind of the same thing with when we're looking at feminism. You have the like feminists, which at its base is just a push for equal rights for humans, is looked at as this far left, and then misogyny is looked up, oh, that's a little bit to the right, when in reality that should be a very like out there position for anyone. It's not even necessarily a right or left issue with misogyny. It's anti-human being.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it is, I mean, misogyny is fundamentally regressive and conservative and traditionalist. You know, it's about taking away the rights that women have earned and fought for hundreds of years. It's about taking away the rights of people of color that they have fought for hundreds of years, and of LGBTQ people. So it is this kind of regressive, you know, traditionalist thing, and it should be considered way outside the norm, because for most of my childhood, I'm 28, for most of my childhood, women's rights, civil, like voting rights for Black people, these were considered not controversial, very good things for society in my like little world, you know, as a young person. The reality was not necessarily reflecting that, but that was kind of the attitude of most people I interacted with, was like, oh yeah, of course it's good for women to have rights. And now it's like, oh, well, that's questionable. Let me think about this. Which rights do we want to give women? Which ones are we happy with taking away? So there is, you know, I don't know. The Overton window, you're absolutely right, has shifted just so far.
What's an Overton window? Josh asks. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I'll let our guest take this.
Yeah. So the Overton window, if you imagine sort of the full spectrum of political ideologies, from the very furthest left you can think of to the very furthest right you can think of, the Overton window is the sort of piece of that spectrum that society generally considers to be acceptable in politics.
Okay.
So when we went from having an Overton window that was just kind of slightly to the right. You might have a few figures that are left of center, you know, a Bernie Sanders or two, an Obama here or there. And then you would have, you know, George Bush and kind of the other more conservative figures. Now we're getting an Overton window that's closer to this right edge, where these kind of fascist guys do seem a little bit fringe, but are still broadly acceptable. And the furthest left we can imagine is Joe Biden. And so that's who we have. So, so that's the Overton window in American politics generally.
That's a really good explanation. Thank you. That totally makes sense of like what is fringe has become less fringe in a really troubling way lately. So,
and it does have a lot to do with nerd culture. I mean, that sounds kind of absurd, but the way that, you know, nerd culture evolved with the internet, the way misogyny evolved with the internet, and the way these two things kind of merged over the past couple of decades, there's a ton of overlap between the processes on the internet that make things popular and these kinds of far-right misogynistic ideals that get generated in these kind of like what used to be backwater spaces of the internet culture, and are now very broadly part of the public conversation. And we hear about it on cable news, and we hear our president talking about it, and we hear Donald Trump making references to QAnon and to the Proud Boys and to all sorts of different guys that came up on the internet. So it does matter. It's very important how these spaces are moderated, how progressive nerds should set standards for their communities and adhere to them, and encourage people to be part of those kind of healthier communities, and say, hey, there is a space for everyone who likes, you know, comic books and video games and whatever weird things that you like. There's space for all of us, including, you know, women and Black people and LGBTQ people and all of the people. And that's kind of the problem, is that the identity around being a white male nerd was very strongly cultivated in the 80s and 90s in pop culture. So we've got this kind of generation of boys and men, well, men now, who are really still very connected to that identity, connected to that vision of, I'm the white male boy who was too skinny and not good at sports, or too fat and not good at sports. And either way, the jocks made fun of me. and I was into things that the jocks weren't into, and girls didn't like me. And then I, you know, grew up and I learned to be a computer programmer, and now I make a bunch of money. And that's what my whole identity and masculinity is based around, right? So when women and people of color and LGBTQ people were getting involved in nerd spaces online, there was a lot of hostility. They were like, you aren't us, okay? We are the oppressed, the actual oppressed nerds. You guys are newcomers to a trend. And so there was this kind of like gatekeeping happening in these communities. And that gatekeeping led to really widespread social problems, because
that's tragic. It's people who like the same stories and the same art and the same thing. Yeah. So that's tragic to me to hear, but it makes sense. We see the results of it, you know?
And I think that, you know, sometimes like white male, you know, straight nerds won't really understand what a queer woman gets from their favorite character, because they're like, that character is me, you know, that character is nothing like you. So how are you connecting with it? And then by offering your own perspective of, well, this is what I connected with in that character, you're kind of challenging what the character means. And at that level, now you're challenging a part of somebody's identity. So it's very personal and really intensely emotionally felt by these people. Their emotions are very real and very genuine. The problem is just how it manifests in this kind of like misogynistic behavior, this kind of outcasting. I have to create my little in-group, and now I'm voting that way too, you know?
Yeah, it's defensiveness, which is sad. Yeah, sorry, Will.
I was just gonna say, part of that, I think, a lot of, like, we kind of lose kind of scope on time frames a lot of these things, because being 30 now, 30 something, I don't remember, not important. Being in my 30s, like, yeah, I had the internet growing up, but I did have to wait like 5 minutes for a robot to be sacrificed to the elder internet to have access. If you remember those days.
Yeah.
But so even I kind of forget this, but both with like that culture, like if we look at the 70s, I think Ghostbusters came out in the 70s, it might have been 80s. It's not that,
the 80s.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so it was a generation of people older than me that was focused on. And then we look at the Ghostbusters now that came out, and we kind of lose perspective of like a lot of fans that were there, that were acceptable to be Ghostbusters fans, are now going to be what, 40-year-old white men.
Yeah.
And you have a whole different group of people that have become exposed to this market over time, and they're growing up now on this, and catering to them, I think, kind of is disillusioning to a lot of older people that exclusively were catered to. Like if we're looking at just because it's topical, Miss Marvel just came out on Disney Plus, and I love Miss Marvel, the comics. I freaking love that comic. Watch the first episode, it is great. I fully endorse it. Everybody go watch it.
I'm watching it tonight. I'm excited. Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure if it's actually good or if it's just hitting me in the nostalgia in just the right spot, but I love the character of Kamala Khan. I love the general premise, and I love how that's kind of expanding this universe so that we can look at more these different types of points of view. But I think it's easy to kind of forget that the reason that a lot of people have, or like the reason there is pushback against that, because those reasons happened before we were even born. And it's really easy to lose that kind of perspective, I think.
Yeah, we kind of have a pretty short memory as a culture and as a people. And we think we keep a pretty good track record, and that we teach all of history. But when I think about the stuff that I missed growing up, you know, in school, in my history classes, about what was actually happening in the country in the 60s and 70s, like history stopped in the 50s when I was in school. That is the latest we possibly went, was World War II. And I don't remember getting much instruction about Vietnam, about the civil rights movement, about anything that happened after World War II. Part of that, dated textbooks. Part of that is just that the people who are talking most about history are talking about things that happened, you know, 20, 30 years before they were born. So for us, you know, born in the, you know, 80s, 90s, there's kind of a gap there. And then for these children growing up right now, how much are they going to hear about the Bush administration? How much are they going to hear about, you know, so they'll hear 9/11 and that's probably it, right? And the rest of it is really the more important stuff. So that is kind of a cultural issue too, is that we just keep this really short memory. And that's why we have those kind of, if you guys weren't here at the very beginning, but Josh and I were talking about backlash against social movements, and how this isn't really a linear process, that you make a little bit of progress, you get hit with a massive backlash, you make a teensy little bit of progress, you get hit. It's, I mean, the work of social justice is surprisingly very long, and you can go back and read stuff that, you know, feminists were writing in the 1920s and Black activists were writing in, you know, the 1870s, and it sounds like it was written today, because it's really been the same struggle for hundreds of years at this point.
Yeah.
So the things that end up having this big impact on our children, they don't hear about it, and then they end up repeating the exact same mistakes
Yeah.
that we made, that our parents made.
It's like I found out that I think it was only in the 70s where it became legal for women to have credit cards in
Yeah.
their name.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
That's
You had to have
ridiculous.
a credit card. Prior to that, you had to have one. Your husband had to open one for you, and it was under his name.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to own any property by yourself
Yeah.
Until
So-
the 70s?
until the
That's,
70s.
and that's in America, the United States. That
You'll
like,
notice.
That's
Go
extremely
ahead, Will,
disheartening.
sorry.
yeah. I was gonna say that's not even like Saudi Arabia, where they only been allowed to drive kind of
Since
in
the
the
90s.
last couple of years.
Well, and you'll notice that in the 1980s, the
Mhm.
divorce rate skyrockets for some reason.
Gee,
And
I
it's
wonder
like,
why.
I wonder why. I
Can't
wonder
imagine.
why. You give women, and then it's leveled out. It's skyrocketed in the 80s. Everybody that was in a marriage they didn't want to be in the 80s got divorced. So like half of all marriages. And then it's kind of petered out. Millennials are actually the least likely generation to get divorced, but we're also the least likely to get married. So you were a little bit more cautious about it, because women have economic freedom. We have the freedom to live our lives without a husband if we so choose.
Mhm.
And I can get a credit card if I need to, and I can get a mortgage. But that is not, so you see how this really, really drastically affects the population.
Mhm.
I want to go ask my parents now and be like, that happened 50 years ago. How have we not talked about this? Like, that happened in your lifetimes. That's insane, you know?
It used to always blow my mind when talking to my grandparents. You know, my mom was born in, I'm not trying to air out or dirty laundry or anything, but my mom was born in 62. She used to always tell me how my grandma wasn't allowed to work. But my grandpa, brought home the bacon, for lack of a better term. And then growing up, I got to watch my mom for first couple of years of my life. It was just my mom working, because my dad wasn't really in the picture. And then when we moved in to my stepdad's house, my mom was still the only one consistently working. Then I'd go to my grandparents and I'd hear these stories about how my grandma wasn't allowed to work, how my grandpa did all the work. It always kind of blew my mind that just the difference in culture from our grandparents' age to our parents' age to our age, where it's more understood that if there are two people in a house, both of them are more often than not working.
Yeah. And that's that's kind of a forced reality now for our generation.
Yeah.
But I think there's also kind of a key point there that you mentioned with your mother. If she was born in 62, she would have been 18 in 1980. So by the time she was an adult, she could own a credit card. And I mean, that would have been fairly new, but she wouldn't have known an adult life without that. And that kind of reframes the timescape that we're looking at, of when we have our parents don't even realize, or may not even realize, how short that time has been. That we've made this type of progress, which is just absolutely blows my mind sometimes.
Mine too. And it feels honestly, I do feel a little bit scared looking at the last few months of what rights for women and LGBT people, the direction that's taking. Being bisexual and a woman, it pertains to me, the way this country feels about my existence and my ability to run my own life and make my own decisions that have massive consequences for my health, my financials, the way I spend the next 18 years, my career, everything, right? This is a huge thing to wrest control from someone. And so vote in the midterms is my advice if you're a feminist. I know it sucks to be told to vote, and I know it feels like nothing matters. And I know we got Joe Biden and a majority in the House and the Senate, and we're still losing things. But just vote anyway, is my advice. From a very, very tired feminist, just please.
Yeah, and I think that's key there is vote in the midterms and also vote in primaries. Those are the important elections that we have to win. Because like if we let things go to the general election, then we end up with Joe Biden's conservative ass.
And
left candidate.
the very left-wing Joe Biden.
Or we end up with the lesser of two evils.
Yeah. And that's just insane to try to continue to work with just the lesser of two evils.
On that note, your local elections matter just as much, if not more, than the national elections. Your local elections, that is where this whole, I don't even want to get into it, but this whole critical race theory is being taught in the schools thing. That is happening in your local school board right now. And if you want to protect the rights of educators to have, control over the content, the educational content of schools, that is something you need to demonstrate in your local election, because that is where the real fight is happening. It is happening in the school boards. It's happening on the city council. If you care about anything, please at least try to care about your local politics, because it does matter. I say that, but gosh, I haven't been to a city council meeting in Colorado Springs like ever. So maybe I should take my own damn advice. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to a city council meeting this week.
Nice.
Yeah, that's my goal.
We should do a follow-up podcast on this, because I think it's, I get fired up about things, but then I think, okay, with all the responsibilities I have as an adult, like, how do I allocate time to really pursue those things? And so we should do a podcast exploring ways to do that and tips and best practices, and because it's hard, and I think, again, the system doesn't have inertia. It likes to stay where it's at, so it makes it hard for us. So
Absolutely.
The status quo doesn't want to change. So it's we should explore that further, because that's a really great topic.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this has been an awesome podcast. Marley, thank you for your insight. This has been wonderful. We want to have you back on again to talk more, because this was great. This is our first podcast getting political. I think we covered some really good stuff. So yeah, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invite. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was excellent. Well, everyone, thank you for watching Nerds and Friends, and we'll have Marley back on for sure. Thanks again for watching. I got to find the stop button.